One member of KTIB's alumni family is Brian Landrum. We recently caught up with this one-time teenage station employee who has gone on to much bigger heights in broadcasting. Brian, how are you doing today?
Oh, doing good.
Well, Brian, we want to get caught up with you. How are things up in Tennessee?
Oh, things are fine here in Tennessee. It's really nice to be part of the legendary WSM and the Grand Ole Opry. When I was a kid, I guess the two stations that I listened to most were KTIB, and then grew up at night listening to the WSM Grand Ole Opry. So it's nice that I was able to, at one time or another, be part of both of them.
Well, let's start with that. Did you grow up right here in Thibodaux?
I grew up in Thibodaux. Went to Thibodaux High School, and
what year did you graduate, by the way?
84.
84.
And I didn't really get the radio bug. I guess a technical bug early. I didn't really get a radio bug. I just kind of liked gadgets, and really liked taking them apart, and putting it all back together. But I really did like music a lot, and I guess that's kind of what got me interested in radio. And when I was about 12, I kind of experimented with a little bit, and believe it or not, built two radio stations in my barn, an AM one and an FM one.
Wow!
And I played around with that a little bit. When I remember talking to my folks who made a big deal about I should get a summer job when I was 14, and all my friends were working at Burger King, which was the only fast food place in Thibodaux at the time, and asked me if I'd go to work there. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, drop me off at KTIB. I'll go in there and ask for a job. And sure enough, I did. They made a tape of me. The program director was Jimmy Cole, who also did a midday show. And I befriended him and the afternoon guy, a guy named Joe Wall. And they, made a tape of me. And I didn't really hear anything necessarily right away. But I remember getting a call from Joe Wall asking me how old I was. Back then, they could actually legally ask you that. Nowadays, you got to be careful about that. But I told him I was 14, and he said, "Well, if you're 16, I think Jimmy would give you a job." I said, "Well, then sounds good to me. I'll be 16." So about an hour later, Jimmy Cole, the program director, called me and said, "Well, we're interested in you doing weekends here on KTIB. Would you be interested?" I said, "I'd love to." He says, "How old are you?" I said, "Well, I'm 16." He said, "Great, come on in." I filled out the paperwork and worked there, and I remember on my 18th birthday, my real 16th birthday would have been to Jimmy my 18th birthday. He made a comment about us going out and grabbing a drink to celebrate. And at that time I had to fess up that I was actually just really 16, and he knew it. He was just trying to get me to admit it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, but I tell you what, so it sounds like Jimmy Cole and Joe Wall really inspirational in getting you going. How long did you stay here at KTIB?
Let's see, until I was 17, so 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to WNOE in New Orleans. And I guess that's when the radio bug really kicked in, because before I was in school. I graduated at 17 in 84, and I was in school. And, yeah, Jimmy did inspire me a lot. Jimmy inspired me just because he was really kind of laid back, and it seemed to take a lot to impress him. So I always wanted to continue to impress him. So I think that I just worked hard because I would do anything because I wanted to impress him. And another gentleman that influenced me was Joe Wall influenced me because he was just a good jock, I thought. And then Roy Pugh, who was the general manager and did some morning shows, did as well. And I always tell people that Roy was the guy that promoted me from being a disc jockey to being a janitor, because there was a time when they lost their cleaning guy, and he asked me if I wanted to make extra money being a cleaning guy, which paid more than being a disc jockey. So I said, okay. So I always tell people I was promoted at KTIB from being a disc jockey to being promoted to be janitor. But I kind of got the bug and was reading all the radio magazines and realized some things were going on in New Orleans, and WNOE had changed the country from rock, and I just went into New Orleans one day and drove around and stopped and brought tapes to WTIX, which at the time was still playing music, and WNOE. And it was around the time the World's Fair was in New Orleans, and I'll never forget, they hired me to be on WNOE to do weekends, and I never forget because I went to the World's Fair that night with some family, and the general manager of WNOE was there. But little did I know he was a general manager because earlier that day, that guy was at WTIX when I was dropping off tapes, and he kind of joked with me because he kind of thought that I really liked the idea of working at NOE when, in fact, even though I did, I would have taken any job in New Orleans. So when he saw me at all the various radio stations and he saw me later on that night, he kind of made fun of it. But we got along, and that was it wasn't long that I went from being part-time there to full-time there, and had a lot of fun doing that. And, of course, being a kid at the time, I didn't realize what I had, so I jumped from there to other jobs that I thought were better. But, it's one of those mistakes you live and you learn as a kid,
Now, when you were back here at KTIB, did you get along pretty well with the ownership, with Mr. Sadie and the rest of the gentlemen?
I did. I never really saw Mr. Sadie that much, maybe at some Christmas parties or if he stopped by. It probably just could have been because of my schedule, but and when I was on the air, when I was at school and all of that. But I did. I mean, I had heard nothing but good things, and I was never exposed to any negativity. And that the radio station, again, I can't speak for it now, but I can only speak from when I was there. And it may have been just because I was just a doe-eyed kid. I mean, just a big deer-in-the-headlights kid, but to me, and as I look back on it, it was one of the best-run radio stations I had ever been a part of, and even to this day, one of the best-run radio stations, technically, musically, and it was well-known in the community. I still go backstage at the Opry here now with my job here and talk to some of the old-timers, if you will, in country music. Eddie Raven, who's from Louisiana, I said something the other day, reintroduced myself to him, and the first thing he said was KTIB. It was very respected in the country music community, all the way from the 60s to the 80s. So it was a great place to be part of. And to this day, you can't talk to people who have been in the business a while without knowing KTIB or even KHOM in Houma when Mr. Sadie owned it. So, there was nothing but good things going on about that radio station. And one of the fun things was when it went from 500 watts to 5,000 watts, which was exciting because nobody had AM stereo. We were taking the radio station 24 hours a day, which even though it was successful as a daytime radio station, was just fascinating. And that was a lot of fun to be part of as a kid, to have all of that and be part of that. And I'll credit KTIB with teaching me the right way to do radio and the time that it was in. And to this day, when I teach people radio, I teach them those ways because nowadays, so many things computerized and so many things that are automated. I think that it's great to have the perspective of still playing 45s and tape and all of that stuff and doing a lot of live stuff and doing things off the cuff. When today things are kind of handed to you with computers to make it easy for you, I still try to teach people in the way that I learned back then because I want them to not to depend on the computer. I want them to depend on their own talent. So I learned a lot there from all those people. Marie Bergeron in news and obviously in sales, and they did teach me a lot.
And I take it also because you did a lot of weekends, you probably got to know Leroy Martin pretty well.
Yeah, I did. Of course, Leroy was on and off because he got into politics, and the laws of equal time were a lot more stringent than they are today. So a lot of times he'd be on, and then he wouldn't be on because he was running for some office. But, yeah, I did, and, of course, I grew up listening to him because my mom talked Cajun French. So since the show was part French and part English, I got to learn a lot about that culture from my mom, and those are the people my mom grew up listening to or grew up with or were part of the crowd that she ran around with. So, all those people were important part of my life, and still to this day talk to country music and Opry star Jimmy C. Newman, who's from Louisiana, who still fondly mentions all those gentlemen, and it's fascinating to be part of that because it's neat that I can talk to somebody here that was a part of that when I was growing up.
I understand, I believe it was during roughly the first week that you worked at the station that one of the big news stories of the 80s involving the local area broke with the poison water scare.
I think it was my first week. I remember being excited about it. I remember, obviously, I was still in school. I think I got the call from Jimmy like on a Monday, and he asked me to come in on the weekend. This happened midweek or something like that. We were out of school, And I remember taking my mom to Homa to the Kentwood Water Place because, back then, a lot of stores didn't carry, nowadays it's as popular as you buying a Coca-Cola. But, back then, if you wanted bottled water, it was delivered, or you went to pick it up. And we went to Homa to the Kentwood Water Place, which I think was by the air base. The Kentwood or Beta by the air base in Homa, and we went there to pick up a couple of jugs of it because everybody was really afraid that something was really going on with the water. And I remember being part of that and stopping by the station to do my paperwork and stuff. And I wasn't really part of that, but I remember seeing the excitement of it at the radio station. The memories that stick out first and foremost on that are obviously my first time on the air when I was horrible at timing into the news and to the sports with the network. And I remember Jimmy teaching me from about 6 to 9 on a Saturday, and about 9 o'clock said, "Hey, do you want something to eat?" I guess Mr. Cook was across the bayou, and he said, "I'll go grab you a biscuit." I said, "Great." And he said, I thought he was going to do it between songs or during the music set. Instead, he said, "See you later. Have a good time." And it was probably the worst 10 minutes of radio that it took for him to go across the bayou and come back. But that was his way of training. He put you into the fire so you can really learn what not to do and those things. And I remember on Sunday morning running the control board for all the preachers and the Southern Tones Gospel Group, which ran out of the newsroom, which was just fascinating to me. They still used a microphone from the 1950s, and those guys were great. They even credited me one time on one of their CDs. CD. What am I thinking? It was a 45 or an album on vinyl. Credited me with helping them out, which I thought was neat. As a kid, it was great to be part of that, and just be part of that good old radio that we did. Mm-hmm. The story that kind of embarrasses me the most about KTIB, though, it involves Marie Bergeron. And she probably won't remember this, and hopefully nobody else does. But Marie was always great about coming in and covering stories on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, even if there was a problem. And she came in and reported a story about one of the guys in the Saints, the New Orleans Saints, and she occasionally would hand you the original draft, and then you'd have to realize on the flip side of the news story was the actual story. And we had come out of the network news, and I got on to say, now it's time for local news on 6:30 KTIB, and I was reading the story, and I realized halfway through it that it was the wrong one, and something in my subconscious came out, and I said something like Marie, blah, 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 and let's just say there was an expletive that came out that shouldn't be used on the radio. But it was under my breath, and it must have been a subconscious thing, and I just went on with the story. And my program director, Jimmy Cole, was out at the Winn-Dixie or whatever doing a remote broadcast, and he certainly must have heard. And I got off the air at noon and went to the parking lot of where he was, hoping he didn't hear. But it was one of those things that I wasn't going to bring up. I wasn't going to bring up to say, hey, did you hear this? Because I don't want to get myself in trouble. We talked for a half hour, and he had said he heard some things on my show that he liked and all of that, and I was doing a good job, and I thought, man, I didn't hear what I did at the 9 o'clock news or whatever. And as I was walking out of the trailer that we did our remote broadcast from, he repeated the expletive that I said. And it said, "I don't blame you. She gets us all mad sometimes."
Wow.
And, boy, I tell you what, I thought that would be the beginning of the end of my career in radio.
Oh, well, and of course, you got some people today make a living out of saying that all the time.
Exactly. So I guess, but, 20 years ago, at this point, that was 22 years ago, which is fascinating to me that I've been doing this that long.
Something just came to me since you were at Thibodeau High at the time, and this was a big story because I think it affected school for a few weeks. Were you there, both at the station and at Thibodeau High, when somebody shot the transformer?
I think so. I think I remember that.
Okay, because it was big news because I think the last 2 weeks of school wound up being canceled because I think LP&L couldn't get another transformer in time to do all the repairs before the end of exams.
I don't think I remember the story because I was still around Louisiana, but I'm not sure if it happened just prior to my time there or just after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess what a lot of us would like to know is, like say you mentioned working at WNOE, I take it was rather a lengthy journey to go from here here to there to where you are now. You probably had to do a lot of moving in between.
Yeah, I did, and some of it I regret. I mean, it's this business will cost you family time and all of that kind of stuff. But it's funny, even to this day. Probably up until I got this job, I don't think my dad, who still lives in Thibodeau, and my mom as well, never realized what I did for a living, because this is not your typical job. But I guess if you're on the air, it is. But being a program director, people quite don't understand that. What does it take to run a radio station? All you do is play records and play commercials, and obviously it's a little bit more than that. And I still, up until a few years ago, my dad was still saying he could give me a construction job back home. I mean, he never quite understood what I did until the day that I called him up and said, I'm going to move again. I don't want you to be upset. He's always upset that I'm moving my family around. I said, but I'm going to work for the Grand Ole Opry, and I'm going to work for WSM. And at that point, I think he got it. I think he realized why I've done what I've done for 20 years. He knew that I've always wanted to be part of what goes on in Nashville, Tennessee. I think he finally got it, and I always joke with him that he gave me the bug because they always listen to country radio, still do, and they took me to Opryland when it first opened, and took me to tapings of Hee Haw when I was a kid here in Nashville. And they're the ones that gave me that bug to do that, because that's what made me love country music. So, but yeah, I mean, I did top 40 radio. I even did urban radio, black radio in New Orleans, which was very fun. I find that country audiences and urban audiences aren't really that much different. They're both very passionate and about it, and very family oriented. So I've done a lot of things, but radio is mostly the only thing I've done.
Country music stars, are there still any that you would still like to meet that are still with us?
Well, I've met a lot of them, and a lot of times it's just in business, and a lot of times their job is to come to your radio station when you're in the larger markets to sell their records and all of that. But and I've never been a starstruck person. I think I've been more starstruck about meeting some of the old timers, and old timer is a relative word, but when you're talking about a little Jimmy Dickens who's been on the Opry since 1948, who I serve on a board with on the Opry for a charity board, which is also makes my life so surreal that I'm on a board with little Jimmy Dickens and Vince Gill and all those guys. You don't take it for granted. I never have. I've never been starstruck. As a matter of fact, when I get an opportunity to meet people, if there's certain slots, I'll sometimes let friends and family and coworkers meet before I do. It's just always the way I am. But as far as anybody I haven't met that I would like, I don't know whether I have a passion to meet anybody in particular that I guess I'd really like to. But I'll tell you the people that I really have enjoyed meeting, and that's Loretta Lynn. Bill Anderson is one of them that sticks in the head, and the guys from the '80s like John Connolly and guys like John Connolly and folks like Oak Ridge Boys and folks that were really at their peak in the '80s. I really like meeting those guys because those guys were part of the country music I grew up with. I mean, when I was doing country music in the early to mid '80s at KTIB and WNOE, that's the music I was playing. The brand new music was from Janie Fricke and Mickey Gilley and Charlie McLean and John Connolly, as I said, and Eddie Raven, and so I love meeting those guys because they were part of my country music schooling. The various generations of country. I mean, from Kitty Wells, who's still around here, who still sings, and all the way to the brand new guys in country music. So I've been real fortunate. Everybody always asks me, you're at WSM, you've always wanted to be there. Is it everything you want it to be? And I'll always tell them, it's everything I wanted it to be, and it's some things that I never thought it would be, which some of that's good, some of that's bad. But none of that, and the bad would be maybe too many meetings because it's a corporate world. But if that's is worse than it gets, then life is good.
Right. So it sounds like in the end that this line of work for you has been pretty rewarding.
It has, and for where I go from here, I could work. There's been people that have been at this radio station for 30 years. If I'm fortunate to work for WSM for that long, great. If not, I've been offered professorships at various schools around the area to teach communications, which would be an option that I would try down the line. And so it's for 20-something years, I've been saying, boy, if radio doesn't work out, I'll do this, and radio's continued to work out. I'll just say for people that whoever want to get in radio, understand that it's not an easy business until you get into management, and sometimes it doesn't pay anything. That's not for everybody. Sometimes people luck out in the good deals, but if you want a job that you can meet a lot of people and where it could be rewarding, I'd say it's certainly a rewarding job, and it has been for me. And I think back sometimes where I wish I could have been a longer part of KTIB, and what a great. To this day, I could still hear the jingles that we ran back then on the air. I could still hear Roy Pugh's voice and Marie Bergeron's voice, and I could still, I still remember. I still remember driving to work at 5 o'clock in the morning and sign on the station at 6 o'clock. I can almost recall some shifts verbatim and things that happened, and I can't do that with a lot of other radio stations. It could be that it was my first radio station, but I think it was more than that. I just think it was one of the best radio stations ever, and a great area that was just right for Thibodaux, Louisiana, for its time. It really was. It was such a relevant radio station for its time, and I still think it can be.
Wow. Well, listen, Brian Landrum is on behalf of all of us at KTIB. We really greatly appreciate all your time with this, and it's really good to know that even though you're kind of removed from Thibodaux, Louisiana, that all your memories down here are still very, very, very pleasant.
They are. I mean, it's home. It still is home. I always joke that if I hadn't gotten fired from every place that I worked for in Louisiana, I'd probably still be back down there. But no, not really. But if I hadn't worn out my welcome. But I love Louisiana. My family's still down there. My mom and dad, my brother, and my sister lives in New Orleans. So it's still part of my life, and always will be. And I pass by that station on Green Street every time I'm home visiting, just to see if it's still there. It's still a big part of my life, and and always will be a very important part of it.
Brian Landrum, one of the many who has helped KTIB provide quality